Today, I'm pretty excited about our deep dive with DUI. This is something that I was excited about when I got into diving, which is going down to Mexico and starting to explore cave diving and just do something completely different. So today, our presenter is Natalie Gibb.
Hi,
Welcome.
everybody. Thank you. All right, and we should be going back. Technical difficulty. Hold on. Share. All right. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today in the middle of the day. As Jack mentioned, my name is Natalie Gibb, and I'm a professional cave diver. I co-own Under the Jungle, which is a cave diver training center in Mexico. I'm a TDI full cave instructor. I do photos, I write. I'm a member of the Women Divers Hall of Fame. And most importantly, I am an underwater cave explorer. With my business partner, Vincent Roquette Catala, we have led our team to discover over more than 20 new cave systems in Mexico, and we've mapped well over 80 kilometers of previously undiscovered cave passageways at this point. And as Jack mentioned, today I'm going to talk to you about my passion for cave diving. I'm going to cover three main topics in my talk. The first is, why is diving in Mexico's caves so incredibly fascinating? We're going to talk a little bit about how you can become a cave diver if you're curious about it. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about some of my most exciting exploration projects. So, why are the flooded caves in Mexico so incredibly fascinating? Because diving in Mexico's caves really is incredible. And the caves are truly beautiful, but they are a lot more than that. The caves here in Mexico are sort of time capsules. They teach us about the past, and when we dive into them, we learn about the history of the planet. The water is so clear that it makes you feel like you're floating in air, not diving in water. And that same clean, crystalline water provides fresh drinking water for people throughout the Yucatan Peninsula. And it supports strange and endemic cave life. And diving in the caves is a bit like traveling to another planet. Divers can find strange visual phenomena, such as this really weird, blurry underwater river, which we call the halocline. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Or hydrogen sulfide clouds, which are also really strange. So firstly, to understand why the caves are so interesting from a historical standpoint, it's important to understand how they form. Some of you probably already know this, so I'll try to make this only a really brief overview. Where I live in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula has borders with the Caribbean and with the Gulf of Mexico. Most of the caves I work in are over here, which is really close to the East Coast, although we have found caves along the North Coast, and there's also deep caves in the center of the peninsula. The Yucatan Peninsula began to form about 200 million years ago, when ocean sediments, coral skeletons, and even microfauna skeletons combined to form a calcium carbonate bedrock, or limestone platform. The part of the limestone platform that's above the water today is the Yucatan Peninsula. The fact that the bedrock formed under the ocean means that we can find marine fossils embedded in the limestone. We can see them on land, but also underwater in the caves, exposed by the dissolution of the bedrock. Like these conch shell fossils that I'm showing you here, or sea urchin fossils, or even coral fossils. All of these things are as old as the bedrock that they are found in. The fact that the Yucatan Peninsula is limestone has other implications. Limestone is soluble by water, which is how the caves that we dive in form, by slightly acidic rainwater dissolving the limestone. This type of limestone is called karst, and there are a lot of interesting things about karst landscapes. One of the things is that the water level in the caves changes based on sea level. Right now, with high sea levels, most of the coastal caves are below the water table and fully flooded, which is why we can dive in them. But when the sea levels were lower, some of them were partially flooded, like in this image that I'm showing you right here. And during glacial periods, they were completely air-filled. And this allowed the formation of stalactites and stalagmites, or what we call speleothems. These sort of dripstone formations only form in air-filled passageways through a chemical process. So when the caves are flooded, like they are now, they can no longer grow. Along the coast of the peninsula where I live, there are no above-ground lakes or rivers. All the water drains underground quickly. So when the sea levels were lower and the water table was deeper, the freshwater aquifer could only be accessed through deep wells or by going deep underground into the caves that were at the water table. So here in Mexico where I live, we have fully flooded caves full of ancient formations that formed when the sea level was lower. And we have dry caves where the formations are still growing. And we even have partially flooded caves, a combination of the two. As a photographer, these are some of my favorites because they make for truly beautiful photos. The presence of these cave formations tells us about the ancient climate, and scientists can study speleothems in combination with rocks and fossils to learn about historic sea levels, rainfall, and much more. But we can also find other things in the caves that tell us about surface events and even about extinct animals. Just looking at the rock colorations when we dive, we can learn so much about what was happening on the surface. The gray rock here is likely to be ash from ancient forest fires. When the caves were dry, rainwater carried the ash underground where it became part of the rock. We could even find charcoal from ancient forest fires kilometers back in the caves. It's perfectly preserved. During the last glacial period, which ended 10 to 12,000 years ago, animals might have gone underground into a cave just like this one to seek shelter or to find cooling water when the caves were dry. This means that the caves are interesting from a paleontological standpoint. This is a giant ground sloth skeleton that Vince and I discovered way back in one of our exploration caves. Giant ground sloths were alive during the age of megafauna in North America, which according to Wikipedia was 2.6 million to 11,700 years ago. They were really giant. Look at the size of Vince compared to the pelvic bone on the right. Until divers started venturing into Mexico's flooded caves, there weren't many paleontological finds in the area because the hot, wet environment on the surface causes bones to degrade and disappear. There was a missing fossil record with almost no evidence of megafauna in Central America and in southern Mexico. But the cool, fresh water in the caves, the static environment, is much better for preserving animals. This one here is the sloth's claw, and it's almost as big as my hand. And this is the sloth's head. You can see the jaw in sort of in the center here. It's delicate, and it would have degraded on the surface and disappeared from history. This is what a giant ground sloth is thought to look like, in case you're interested. And we wouldn't have been sure that they lived in the region if divers weren't finding their remains in the caves. The caves are even good for preserving artifacts from past civilizations. The Maya believed that the cenotes were sacred, where their gods lived, and would toss sacrifices like this pot into the cenote wells to appease the gods. So one of the reasons that I find Mexico's caves so interesting is that they are like time capsules. We are diving into a place frozen in time before the caves were flooded and when ancient animals roamed the earth. The Yucatan's caves are also interesting from a biological perspective to divers. When we're down in there diving, we can find these unique cave creatures, or troglodytes, many of which are endemic or found only in the flooded caves of the peninsula. This right here is a cave blind fish. It's colorless because it has no need for pigmentation in the dark, and it has skin grown over its eyes because it no longer uses them. These guys can live for decades. This is a remipede. It's like an underwater millipede, and they're actually really cool and not creepy when you find them in the caves. They live in the salt water, and they're also endemic. They swim by moving all of their little legs, and you're going to see one in a video in a moment. And there are huge amounts of tiny shrimp and other crustaceans that live in the caves. This one here is one of my favorites. It's an isopod. They're tiny little cave roly-polies that behave just like they do on land. Here it is, uncurling and crawling along. Just off the coast, the island of Cozumel, across from Playa del Carmen, also has caves. It's home to one of the most unique places in the planet, which is a cave called Aerolito. Aerolito is connected to the ocean and filled with ocean life that has become cave dwelling. I want to pause here and show you this cheesy GoPro video, an attempt to narrate it over the music, of some of the life that we found in the Cozumel caves. This is a remipede in a cave called Chempita. Look at it go. And Chempita has a depth of 150 feet. This is quite far. This is Aerolito, and that's a scallop. Hundreds of meters from the ocean. They live in the total dark, and it's just swimming around the cave line. Here's Vince and Herman swimming through a crack, and if you look carefully, you can see white sponges and little like starfish there in the corner. Here's Vince looking at more cave scallops just rusted on. These are cave brittle stars. The floor of this place is absolutely crawling with them. I'm calling this the not blind fish. It actually has a technical name. It's got eyes still. That's a starfish way back in a flooded cave. And this is the first example of a halocline you're going to see. It has fresh water on top and salt water on the bottom. And if you look carefully, you can see little white spots on the formations. Those are all tiny little starfish and little worms and creatures living on the cave decorations. And this is actually Herman collecting a remipede from Chempita to do a scientific study. It's the only cave in the world where that particular species is found. Places are just massive. So the caves are full of history, and they are also full of life, but that's not all. There's a few more interesting features that makes them really fascinating to cave divers. This is a photo of the halocline. Halo is for salt, and cline is for gradient, so it's a salt gradient. It's the interface of fresh and salt water, and it looks like an underwater river or lake. It's one of the most unusual features to dive through in Mexico's caves. It's so cool. This is Alex Frazier diving through the halocline last year during one of our shop science expeditions. And you can see that when the layers are mixed, there's this blurry visual effect. It really looks like it's flowing. From a hydrogeological standpoint, haloclines are interesting as well. The freshwater in the caves is saturated with calcium carbonate, as is the salt water. But when the two are mixed at the halocline, the resulting solution is not saturated. This means that just at the halocline, the water can dissolve more rock and form more cave. It acts like a chemical blade or saw, cutting away at the cave. So many of the caves that we dive are actually widest and biggest just at the halocline level. So here in Mexico, it's not an unusual feature to find when diving the cenotes, but it's super cool. And what's this wispy fog underneath the diver? That's hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas dissolved in water. Here you can see the hydrogen sulfide cloud at the pit, at the bottom of the cenote. It's released as a metabolical byproduct from the breakdown of organic matter like leaves by microbes. It often layers just at the halocline level due to its density. In light concentrations, it's not hazardous to scuba divers, but in high concentrations, it can be problematic, as it is in some of our exploration projects. So Mexico's caves are beautiful, but there's so much more to them than that. They're filled with history and biology and geology, and they're still largely unexplored. I've been doing this for 14 years, and I'm still learning things about them. So I'm constantly in awe of the caves of this planet. This is a good point to stop for questions. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer them about my caves.
So the first question I have is, all the pictures seem so crystal clear. Are there any instances where you have problems with silting?
So yeah, you could have problems with silting. Here where we are, basically the limestone bedrock is a giant filter. So you don't have things like rain doing a lot of runoff and pouring into the caves and disturbing the visibility. So most of the time, 99% of the time, I would say that the visibility is just as crystal clear as you're seeing it in my photos and in my videos. Visibility disturbance would be mainly caused by poor diver technique, or if we are exploring, when you're in a place that nobody's ever been before, when you breathe out and your bubbles hit the ceiling, you get what's called percolation, which is your bubbles knocking like tiny little microscopic like bits of rock and dust off the ceiling. And for the first couple times you're in an entirely new cave, that can cause an actual complete loss of visibility. That's more of a concern if you're actually doing cave exploration. If you're diving somewhere where there's established cave lines, which is what normally people are doing, then it's perfectly clear and it's always beautiful like this.
Yeah, I kind of look at it as like, wherever other people have gone and they've laid cave lines down, it's kind of like going to a ski resort. There's designated paths you go down. So it's pretty well mapped out. So the next question, I'm actually going to combine two questions together, is what are the water temperatures? And because I know they can vary, but also at the same time, when you're doing the fresh and the salt water in the cave at the same time, how do you deal with weighting?
Yeah, two very good questions. Okay, so water temperature first. The water temperature is usually between 77 degrees Fahrenheit and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, somewhere around 25 or 26 degrees Celsius in the fresh water. And depending upon the time of the year, the salt water can be a few degrees warmer or just like 1 degree warmer. Salt water is kind of creeping in from the ocean and sometimes even coming up like through the rock. So it's a little bit more warm, whereas the fresh water is coming down from rainfall and that cools it a bit. The halocline itself, you do need to consider weighting. Halocline is usually deeper, so depending upon how far you are from the coast, it could be anywhere from, let's say, 8 feet deep right by the coast all the way to like 70 meters, like 200 and something feet deep in the middle of the peninsula. So clearly if you're getting into deeper areas, usually the compression of your suit, if you're using a wetsuit and such, doesn't require you to weight yourself differently. If you are going to be diving in a dry suit, which I do, that's how I know Jack, then you would want to consider weighting yourself so that you can be neutral in the dry suit in the salt water. It's not like 100% salt, it's a little salty, so in most cases, a couple extra pounds is sufficient.
So just a little quick story. I know that in open water, as you're going up, you're always venting your BCD because the air expansion. So the first time I experienced going from one layer to the next, I found that all of a sudden I just kind of like hit this plane where I had vented air thinking I was just going to keep shooting to the surface, but I came to a different density of the, the water change in the halocline, and I just kind of flattened out, and I was like, uh-oh, I need to keep going up somehow. Anyways, I let out too much air.
Break, you have to kind of punch through that barrier. So you have to inflate to go up at a certain point and deflate to go down just right when you're crossing that halocline barrier.
So quick question about when you're finding things down in the cave, is there a problem with invasive species now being entered or introduced into the caves at all?
There actually, it's a very good question. There have been problems with invasive species in the past. So a couple different things that can happen. In really remote places where there hasn't been a lot of recreational cave diving, we will often turn off our lights actually while we're swimming the first 100 feet into the cave and just hold the line, because otherwise the fish from the open water of the cenote can follow you in and then they just wreak havoc because the cave inhabitants are blind and the open water fish use your lights to hunt them. So you can have problems with just the open water fish going into the cave. And then the other thing that has been seen here is that some of the cenote owners at some point were like putting things like tilapia into the cenotes because it's freshwater, so then they have like a food source. And that was just like trashing the ecosystem, eating all of the freshwater fish and then eating all of the vegetation in the open water of the cenotes, which was obviously just like completely destroying the ecosystem and killing everything else off.
So a couple more quick questions. Sorry. Is the local government doing anything to help protect the caves, or is it just mainly the divers trying to protect the cave systems?
A little bit of both. I think they are technically getting closer to being protected, but it's like anywhere where you have a relatively poor community and then some really like big, heavy corporations. So the punishment for like destroying a cenote would be, you get a huge fine. So if you have billions of dollars in hotels, that's not a deterrent. It's just the cost of bulldozing, the cenote or the mangroves, which is problematic. I'm involved with an initiative called Somos los Cenotes, which is basically like a way we're trying to call attention to the cenotes as a source of tourism income and share the information that the cenotes are really beautiful and worth preserving with everybody. So I encourage you to check that out as well. We have a Facebook and Instagram page for it as well.
So I have one other question, but it might relate to the third part of the presentation. Okay. So I'm going to hold that for later.
Okay. Shall we keep going, Jack?
I would say keep going. Next step.
Yeah, keep going?
Yep, keep going.
All right, so at this point, I hope you guys are all at least a little bit interested in cave diving. Clearly for me, it's the best thing ever. So the next question is, how do you become a cave diver if you want to do this? Is it dangerous or scary, or what's the process like? So divers who are interested in becoming cave certified often, first of all, wonder, is it dangerous? And in the early days of cave diving, it certainly earned its reputation as the world's most dangerous sport. However, that was decades ago, and I actually think that now recreational cave diving is pretty safe, provided that divers seek proper training from an experienced instructor and that they follow the rules. Although I do feel that exploration is a little bit riskier. However, I certainly feel more at risk than anything else just driving on the highway in a car than I do in a cave. And the reason is that in a cave, only my own actions and my own decisions will get me killed. Cave diving is all about control, both mental and physical. So once the basic cave skills are learned in training, it's 90% a mental activity. It's a cave diver's mental state and either good or poor decisions that will most often endanger him. A proper cave course, therefore, will train your brain to react calmly and to make good decisions underwater and to deal with stress in a cave. As a cave instructor, it's my goal to get my students dive techniques and mental control methods ingrained so that they can relax and turn their attention to the incredible cave that they are diving. In other words, if a student feels stressed or hyped up with adrenaline after a cave dive, I'm really not doing my job. Caves should not be scary, and cave diving should not be an adrenaline sport. So if you are a diver looking for cave training, you want to seek instructors that promote a calm and methodical mindset, not somebody that's going to try to prove to you how cool they are. All cave courses have a few similarities. And the first big one is that they follow the rules of accident analysis. These are 5 basic rules that are held as canon by all cave divers. Accident analysis in cave diving gives us 5 reasons that cave divers tend to die. And to this day, these rules are implicated in just about every single cave accident. The first rule is that you need to seek proper training. And you're doing that by enrolling in a cave course with a qualified instructor. In the early days of cave diving, no instruction was available because people were figuring it out as they went along. And it's one of the reasons for the high fatality rates at the beginning of cave diving. The next rule, the next thing we see people doing to die is not having a continuous guideline to the open water or making a navigational error. So the rule here is that to avoid getting lost, cave divers must always follow or place their own guideline. And this guideline should run through the cave all the way to the open water where they can surface. Any intersections in this line should be marked by a personal marker. The ones in this photo are called REMs to avoid any confusion. The cave line provides a visual reference so you can't get lost, but it also provides a physical reference so that you can hold the guideline and exit even if you completely lose visibility. The next rule that we see is that people sometimes mismanage breathing gas. So to stay safe and not run out of breathing gas in the cave, we always follow the gas management rule of thirds. This basically means that you get 1/3 of your gas to go in and 2/3 to exit. So we always start our exit with twice the amount of gas that we need to get out. And we always have it distributed between a minimum of 2 tanks. A cave diver can safely exit, therefore, on only 1 tank in the event of a gear failure, or he can share air with a buddy and still get both divers out. The next thing we see implicated in cave fatalities originally is death. Deep diving in caves can be dangerous because of decompression and narcosis. And of course, diving in general has got a lot safer with regards to these things since the beginning of cave diving. So the rule here is don't dive deep without the proper training and without using the proper breathing gases for going deep, which would be trimix instead of air and the proper decompression gases. And of course, you need technical cave training so that you have sufficient gas to survive a gas loss, even with an elevated breathing rate, even if you're stressed. And technical cave training can help people to plan for most of these eventualities. Finally, the gear. At the beginning of cave diving, people could die from gear failure. So these days, we always carry redundant life support equipment. 2 tanks, 2 regulators, extra lights, extra reels, extra spools, extra of everything. This means that no single equipment malfunction should endanger a diver's life. He just switches to his backup and starts to exit with his team. Additionally, each team member has redundant gear, which can be donated to a diver in the unlucky event of multiple gear failures. As far as the training goes, most agencies break down cave diving into several steps. So we have base skills, CAVERN, and then a level 1 style course, which with my organization is Intro to Cave, and a level 2 style course, which with my organization is Full Cave. So base skills first. Before learning to cave dive, it is important to master base skills in the equipment configuration that you're planning on using, whether it's side-mounted doubles, back-mounted doubles, or even a rebreather. A good base skills course will teach you how to manage all aspects of your equipment configuration, including valve shutdowns, air sharing, wing failures, and where applicable, hardware failures. The base skills course will also cover propulsion techniques, such as frog kicking, reverse kicking, flat turns, and we'll cover trim and buoyancy techniques as well. And here's the trick. Any cave or cavern course that offers to teach you these things during cave training does not have your best interests at heart. You're not going to get as much out of your cave training if you're concerned about mastering the basics like buoyancy, kicking, and trim while trying to master base cave diving skills. You want these courses to be separated. After that, you have CAVERN. Most organizations offer a CAVERN level as the first step in cave certification, although a few of them like GUI jump straight into cave. The CAVERN is basically the entrance to the cave, an area no more than 200 feet or 60 meters from the open water, with daylight, good visibility, and no tight spaces. The way my shop teaches it, CAVERN is actually the most difficult level, as it introduces all the overhead diving base skills, which must be mastered to the level that they would be used in the cave before the student can continue to cave training. Our reasoning is that even in training, cave students could face a real life situation, and we would want them to be safe. So our CAVERN courses cover passive and active communication, air sharing in the overhead, zero visibility line following and real work, problem management in the overhead environment, and even navigation protocols. Once a diver has mastered the CAVERN skills, the next step is the first cave level, or Intro to Cave with TDI, which is my organization. Here the student learns to apply all of the skills he learned in CAVERN to the cave environment with easy navigation over a single guideline, no tight places, and no intersections. During Intro to Cave is taught by TDI, students also learn skills such as locating a lost guideline without visibility, searching for a buddy, repairing a broken guideline, and dealing with entanglements. Penetration is limited to 1/6 of the total gas in the diver's doubles. And then you have the final level of cave training, which is full cave. Here, students may penetrate further using a full 1/3 of their breathing gas. They learn how to navigate intersections and move farther away from the main cave passageway. They practice dealing with restrictions or tight places. And some organizations allow decompression with oxygen at this level. So while all training organizations have small differences, each organization has some sort of stepwise program that divers learn gradually. So you just don't take off immediately for hours into a tight cave right off the bat. And you don't have to be a highly experienced technical diver to start cave training. It's the instructor's job to slowly turn you into that type of diver. Cave diving has really evolved since its early days. We've learned from divers' mistakes and gained a good safety record. So I would encourage anyone interested in cave training to pursue it. Just realize that training as a process takes time and it's best done bit by bit, and try to learn each level really well before proceeding to the next so you get the most out of your courses. And that's a good place to stop if anybody has questions about cave training.
Okay, first question is, this is not meant to be an advertisement, but what side mount system do you personally use? And do you have any recommendations for side mount systems in general for Mexican style cave diving?
I would say I have 2 recommendations that I really like them both. I dive a Razor, which is like one of the original side mount systems that came out of Mexico. It was developed by Steve Bogarts. It's hyper streamlined, and for anything where I would be in a wetsuit, for anything where I would be doing actual like really tight cave diving, I mean really tight, it would absolutely be the only thing I would use. I teach a lot and am waiting for an X Deep to arrive as well. I'm really happy teaching with this system. For me, once I get it, I'll see, but observing students, I think there's some advantages in a dry suit, and I am diving dry most of the time, just as far as location of the dump valve and things goes. So now that Jack's hooked me up with my awesome new Flex Extreme that I love so much, I'm gonna try to use this as well, and I'm gonna use both of those to match my students. For really small girls, I really think the razor is better. For anybody else, I would say just like your choice, one of those two systems is definitely preferable. They both were developed in Mexico for this style of diving. And I've definitely used the razor in Florida with steel tanks and stages, no problem as well.
Yeah, there's many side mount systems out there right now, and a lot of them are turning into systems that mimic or act like the razor and the X Deep system.
There's small issues with most of the other ones, but I'm open if somebody has something that seems to work like that, we'll try. I haven't gotten through a full cave course without somebody breaking down and buy one of those two systems yet. So.
Yeah, with any of these systems, and personally I found that you still have to do some modifications to make it fit you better or make it fit the way that you want to dive with that system. So a lot of them do have some customization abilities to them. So the next...
Well, that's the thing about side mount is no matter what kind of side mount system you're diving, the advantage of side mount is you can kind of custom fit it to the divers. The disadvantage of side mount is you have to have somebody custom fit your system to you or it's going to be miserable.
Right. So this kind of goes into, can you do back mount for cave?
Absolutely, yeah.
All your images are showing side mount.
Side mount's definitely more popular in Mexico now. So I would say at this point, I dive primarily side mount. And I started cave diving in Mexico, which was about 13 years ago. Nobody dived side mount. People were just doing it as exploration, and there really weren't even any commercially available side mount systems on the market. So I actually did my first 4 years of cave diving and instruction in back mount. I did exclusively back mount for 4 years. And then when I really started getting into some pretty tight exploration, I started getting into side mount. And around that time is when a lot of people started coming out with like really good side mount training programs and things as well, which is a difference from when I started. I'm super happy teaching back mount now. There's nothing wrong with it. And there's some big advantages. Like if you're already a wreck diver and you already dive back mount, unless you want to go into like super tight caves, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that somebody just change their configuration for that unless they see a need for it. So yeah, back mount's great. You still see it. I would just say side mount's more popular right now.
Right. So I kind of missed this question earlier from the first one. So do the bubbles, because you're talking about the bubbles causing stuff to come off the ceiling, do the bubbles cause any damage to the caves? And so is there a move for a lot more rebreathers to minimize that? And also, I assume, to extend your distance.
All right, so yes, bubbles do some damage to the cave. I feel like that this is sort of acceptable. I would call it minimal, because we're gonna put a line in the cave and then you should really just always be within arm's length of the dive. So like the line, so when you're diving, you know, if you're in a place that has been lined before and you stay within arm's length of the permanent guideline, you're really not gonna do any new damage to the cave. Sort of like cutting a pathway to a garden or a forest. It is, you have a tiny bit of destruction, but everything else stays beautiful, and you wouldn't be able to see it without. Rebreather diving, as a rebreather diver, is extremely tricky as far as buoyancy goes. And I would say that here in Mexico, I see way more damage from rebreather divers in our shallow, difficult, tight caves than I do from open circuit. It's really tricky, and for most of the diving we do here, because the caves are so shallow, let's say an average depth of most of our caves is 25 feet, you don't get a huge amount of extra distance from a rebreather, because you have to carry enough bailout to get yourself out of an accelerated breathing rate in case you have a CO2 breakthrough or something. So it's actually, I can probably get farther on a single stage dive than I can on my rebreather in most of the shallow caves. Rebreathers really come into their own, in my opinion, around 80 feet or so. And then it's a big advantage. So I use my rebreather from that, and I'm looking forward to using it for deep cave exploration. Another issue with rebreathers in caves is if you're using them in open water, basically you go down, you get your loop where you want it, and then you're not going through dill, you're going through a really minimal amount of O2. Here in Mexico, we have super sawtooth profiles, and I would say it's normally going up and down from 50 feet to like 15, 10 feet over and over and over again. So just in like the cavern dive at Taj Mahal, it's possible to almost empty your dill bottle, even with an inflation bottle, because you have to keep adding gas to your counter lung. So dives like that with sawtooth profiles, they're also not an advantage. So there's pros and cons of it. I wouldn't say it's the best tool for Mexico cave diving at all, but as a rebreather, diver, and owner, I would say it's really a lot of fun.
Right. So on the rebreather end, people don't, I mean, I assume, I'm saying this as an assumption, if they're doing their intro to cave, they're not doing this on a rebreather. There's
Actually,
a step.
I don't teach on a rebreather. I'm a new rebreather diver. I've only owned my rebreather for slightly over a year. It's been like a year and a half since I got trained on it. So
I'm saying the first time.
Actually, for an experienced rebreather diver, there's a couple people down here that are hyper experienced rebreather cave divers that could teach you on a rebreather from the beginning if that's what you're comfortable doing. And I mean, if all you ever do is dive in a rebreather, there would be an advantage to it, right? Because otherwise you have to relearn open circuit.
Right.
But it wouldn't be with me.
Okay, so that's what I have for now as far as questions.
Cool. All good questions, guys. Thank you. So I guess I'll move on and talk about exploration if that's fine. So exploration, this is a picture of Vince in one of our original exploration projects. So for me, the goal of cave diving was always to become an explorer. This was my original exploration team in 2010. It's me, Anders Knudsen, the landowner Antonio Manrique of our very first exploration project, and that's Vince, and we all look like children. We've had some pretty good successes. So this is the cave from that photo, a shallow, beautiful horizontal cave called Tatich. It's an example of one of those partially flooded caves, max depth like 10 feet. This would be really miserable on a rebreather. And then we've even explored deep sinkholes like this one, which is called Ayin. This is more in the center of the peninsula where we have typically deeper caves. You see here's Vince going down, 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 down. This place is just absolutely massive, all the way down to the floor where the cave can start. And I've even dived into this sort of daunting boil off the coast of the north coast of the peninsula. This cave I named Hydra, and you can see there was some flow. It was also clogged with branches, and we actually had to go underwater with the saw and cut the branches out against the flow to even be able to access the cave. So that's actually Vince with the saw. It was a pretty amazing adventure. But by far, the strangest caves we have ever explored, the most dangerous, and the most rewarding are the microbial caves we've been finding near the southern border of the state. So this started in 2015. We took a boat to a hole in a mangrove forest, and we dropped down into this really sort of spooky green entrance. And we found ourselves in a cave filled with the longest, brownest formations that I've ever seen. And when I swam to a solid-looking rock to tie off my line, it sort of dissolved in my hand. At the same time, the ceiling sort of shifted and slid off and got absorbed into the floor with a vague sort of jiggle. When I recovered from my surprise, I realized that the entire cave was absolutely covered in microbial growth. It coats the walls, and it coats the ceiling, and it coats the floor. We have no idea how thick the floor sediment is, but I know it's more than a meter deep of microbial goo because that's how far I can stick a measuring stick. We're basically swimming inside a vast microbial colony. And if you watch this really old video, you can see all of the microbes sort of wiggle and jiggle. It's the most amazing place. This is actually a GoPro video from the #1 very first dive we ever made into this cave as the initial explorers putting the very first cave line. So you can see that when we breathe out, all the goo just sort of rains off the ceiling at us. And these things we've named snot tights. They're these long microbial straws that drip from the ceiling, and they're soft. And this is me laying the line. This thing's on the wall we started calling webbies. They're sort of this like reticulated stuff. And this is Vince heading his reel at the end of the first exploration dive. I actually emptied my reel first, and then we kept going until we hit turn pressure. And then this is Vince sort of surveying out of the cave. And it makes it a little bit difficult because you've got all this goo raining down on you. It's just GoPro, but it's sort of fun because it's a bit of a historical video for us at this point. This place, Pandora, is a really challenging exploration. The microbial growth makes it difficult because, as you can see, every exhaled breath causes bacteria to flake off the ceiling and cause what we've termed a guck out. Very low or no visibility on the exit. And this creates a time factor as well when writing notes and surveying the cave, because you basically get just one breath. And once you exhale, everything, the visibility just completely disappears. Of course, this adds to stress and makes maintaining a calm mental state more difficult. The microbial growth also makes installing a guideline more difficult because you just don't know what is solid. Some solid-looking points have rock under them, and some are just pure guck. So sometimes when you try to tie off the line, the whole thing just sort of dissolves and disintegrates in our hands, and it leaves us in zero visibility. In small areas, this means that if you make a mistake and you tie off onto something that's not solid, you can't see anymore. You just have to sort of hope that there is space to swim forward and make the time to find the next tie-off point. So after a while, we got used to diving and exploring under these conditions. We came up with this technique where you sort of like slice the exploration line through the goo and see if it hits rock. But what I'm never going to become comfortable with is a type of rock in Pandora and her sister caves. It's been eaten away by the acidic water. It's heavy and it's fragile and it's sharp. So when we are placing our guideline, we have to be aware that the rock can cut our line or our hands. And we can't pull the line as tight as we would like because the rock might snap or shatter off. The large crystal formations, like the ones above Vince here, are so fragile that Vince once saw a meters-long stalactite shatter off from my bubbles hitting it when we were scootering. It fell behind me and just missed my fins and sort of chunked itself into the floor, buried itself in the floor sediment. So we've discovered that for this reason, in caves like this, it's best to just keep moving forward. Finally, there's a great deal of hydrogen sulfide in the water. You can see the difference in the clarity of water from this super edited GoPro screenshot, excuse me, to this unedited screenshot. So it's really foggy with the hydrogen sulfide. Our dives are averaging about 5 hours in these types of places. So this means that we're exposed to hydrogen sulfide for quite some while. Moreover, every time we dive in these places, we disturb the microbes, which releases more hydrogen sulfide. And so the concentration increases over the period of days of consecutive dives. By the 3rd day in a row, we're getting headaches, and we usually reek of hydrogen sulfide. So at this point now, we're actually using dry suits in 82-degree Fahrenheit water, and we're limiting our consecutive number of dives in diving days in a row to 4, so we have some time to sort of off-gas in between dives. We soon reached kilometers-long penetrations from the Pandora entrance. And so we started looking for another entrance into the system. Here, look at this knot tight wiggle. Woo, look at it, it's super cool. The place is just massive. Look at this. Kilometers and kilometers of places like this. And so I'm gonna try to turn down the volume a bit here. A few years later, we gained access to a deserted pump station with a cenote underneath, and we named this place Melmac. And looking at the two caves, we realized that they weren't actually that far apart, and so we decided we were going to try to connect them. So in late 2018, we actually connected these two cave systems. And this is really exciting to us. First of all, it's a huge mega system. It's like 12 or 13 kilometers long at this point. But what's more important to this is it means that this one cave we found, Pandora, isn't completely unique. This points to the existence of sort of a huge mega cave system in the area. So this is a video I took during the connection trip where we went to try to push and connect the two caves. We did this sort of a concentrated team effort with myself, Vince, and Marcelin Davidhouse, and this is my sort of pocket hydrogeologist, Dr. Patricia Meadows. I took her there for one dive, and that's the goo pulling off the ceiling. And you can see here that the microbes just sort of float suspended in the halocline due to their density, which is nuts. And they just kind of hang there. That's Marcelin. And you can see why we would think these were connected, because these places have the same kinds of formations. So that's Pandora, that's Melmac, and we started the connection project. This is Marcelin sweet out over the newly laid line on day one. It's equally massive. There's still a halocline. That's Vince. In his old dry suit, not the DUI. And the first day we got closer, so we knew we were pushing in the right direction. In day two, you're going to see in a minute on the map, we actually got super duper close to making a connection. We were within 20 feet of connecting the two caves, and the visibility from the hydrogen sulfide and the tannic water, the microbial goo, was such that we actually missed it. We were in the correct room. And so day three, we went back, knowing where we really need to go and that we were so close now. And we made the connection and did a little more exploration. And right here, this is a GoPro screenshot video of Vince actually tying in the, hey, there's an exit in both directions arrows on the cave line, with 2 arrows pointing towards Pandora and 2 arrows pointing towards the Melmac side of it. So this was exciting to us. We did that at the end of 2018. And so over the last few years, we've continued to work with the region, and we found more caves. This is a photo of the microbial growth in a cenote that we named Dagobah. It's a cenote about 60 kilometers to the north of Pandora and Melmac. And you can see there's some similarity. There's still a lot of microbial growth. There's still goo everywhere. Some of it looks a little bit different. These are a sort of thing we're calling fuzzies again, but they look more like a hairy tree. You can see here, look at that. It's amazing. It's super soft and it's crunchy. And here in Dagobah, we found something interesting. It's like a hybrid cave. So the deep saltwater tunnels don't have any hydrogen sulfide, and they're actually filled with more of the sort of northern formations, these stalactites and stalagmites, and then this weird gray clay on the floor that we're not quite sure what it is. And then we dove in a really horrible lagoon. This is the horrible lagoon we found, and there was 2 cave entrances. We named this cave Vulcan, and we dove it for 1 day. It was awful. The visibility was like this the whole time. It was about, this is a GoPro on hyperwide. So it's really about like 2 feet high. Sometimes you're lucky it's 3. A lot of this stuff in the water is just from flow. It's really close to the ocean. You can see actually in a moment, hopefully, the whole floor is just filled with dead snail shells. It's just sort of a nasty place that we were not too happy to go back to. So we never dove there again. The cave pinched off, thankfully. I've never been so happy to have a cave end. And then we found later on a cenote a bit north of Dagoba, which we named Antares. And you can see once again, it's got the same hydrogen sulfide, it's got goo, it's got these really spiky, sharp formations. And then about a year ago, we dived in a lagoon even farther north. So now we're like 120, 140 kilometers north of Pandora. And we found 2 more caves in a lagoon. The red color is from the tannins from mangrove roots. The first entrance we dove into, we named Juno. And both of the caves are actually really difficult. They have strong reversing flow conditions. And we even found a wheelbarrow in Juno, about 500 feet from the entrance. So the flow was strong enough to suck a wheelbarrow back at some point, 500 feet back into the cave. Obviously, it wasn't siphoning so hard when we dove in. On the other side of the lagoon, we found Ursus. It is similar in some senses, but it's upstream. It still has reversing flow conditions, and it's actually undivable with almost no visibility for most of the year. So we've been diving in a bit and kind of figured out when it's clear now. This is a clear day. And then finally, a few months ago, we found one more cave. And instead of being north, this one is west of Pandora. It had the most messed up restricted entrance I've ever witnessed, and I named it Medusa. Getting through the entrance and discovering this cave, it's the single proudest moment of my cave diving career, because I found the entrance based on a hypothesis I had about cave distribution in the area, based on all these other caves that we're founding. And it was right where I expected it to be. And there is no way that I would have been able to dive this really horrible, completely restricted, gut-filled entrance even a year previously. I almost feel like all these microbial caves that we've been finding have been slowly ramping up the difficulty level and sort of training me. And I didn't find Medusa until I was actually ready for it. So with this cave, I proved my hypothesis of cave distribution. It was really important to me because we've checked probably hundreds of possibilities over the last 5 years. And we found very little. It's a really difficult area. But this place was right where I expected it to be. So now I feel like I'm onto something. So together, these 8 caves that we have found, that we've worked in over the last 5 years, point to the existence of a huge, unknown, unexplored cave system stretching over 150 kilometers where nobody expected there to be one. And I think this is going to be the Invince's legacy as cave explorers. A massive, nasty, dirty, disgusting, goo-filled, hostile cave system where no one really ever expected them to be. My husband said it best. He was like, "Congratulations, Natalie, you found the most disgusting place on the planet." So now I'm gonna get close to ending this with one more video, and then I've got a brief conclusion and we can do more questions. I was lucky enough to get to work in collaboration with Shearwater for a small little exploration documentary about one of our more recent finds, which was the place called Ursus with the reversing flow. I want to show you this to demonstrate.
I would say that Ursus definitely has a personality. It's one of the few places where we can really never know what's going to happen. We found Ursus about a year ago now, in November, I believe, but the very first time we couldn't dive it. And we came back 2 months after, and that was way beyond expectations. The first time we went down there, really, I thought, what the hell are we doing here? We couldn't see anything. It was like silty slope going down and down and down and down with no place to tie off. And when it finally cleared up at a very interesting and surprising depth of 24 meters, it kept going down in salt water. I think that was like one of the most exciting scouting exploration dive I've ever done. I think Ursus is a challenging dive because of the logistics it involves to go there, the money it involves, the time. We had to use this tiny dinghy that is not really fit for even like probably one person. So we had to put 3 persons on it, plus 4 tanks, plus dive equipment. And then we had to go through the mangrove, pulling ourselves through the branches, putting our heads down to avoid big branches fallen on the way. So it felt like navigating on a nutshell, literally, over a big lagoon. So one day, at the end of the dive, excited after a very good exploration dive, the wind had picked up on our nutshell, making it very difficult to cross the lagoon again. So I just ended up clipping one of the DPVs to my crotch, and they tied a rope to my butt D-ring, and I pulled the entire dinghy with the people on top back to the other shore and back to the car, and we didn't have to sleep there. Pulling the boat was actually really fun. That was a bit hard on the crotch at the end though. We have no idea if we're going to be able to dive every time we go there. We have seen it changing so many times, from last time crystal clear still water in incredible big passages, to some incredibly siphoning water with a half-foot visibility, which really didn't allow us to dive for safety reasons. We jumped in the water planning for 4 tanks each, scooter, deco tanks. I started to drop down our permanent line, and I was literally like sucked in the cave by crazy siphon. I couldn't see Nat, and I was just like drifting in the cave because of the inflow with half-foot visibility. So that was a scary experience. We found each other at 20 feet of depth in the entrance. We clenched our fist and thumb up into the face to be able to communicate, and we just swam out laughing that was definitely not good conditions to start an exploration dive.
Oh god, that was scary. Fucking scary.
You know when people like envision that cave diving is scary and you're gonna die and they have this terror of cave diving? This is what they're thinking about.
To go and pee and float in the mangroves. That's what we do. That's where we spend our money.
This is what a failed exploration dive looks like. Dive gear strewn about, cameras floating on the water. Vince isn't even hungry yet.
Right now, I would say that we can dive and explore Ursus when Ursus wants us to be exploring there.
3 inches down on the roots is a pretty big deal. So when it looks like this, no diving.
We did probably 5 or 6 exploration dives right now at Ursus, maybe a few more, 7 or 8. And the very end of line was ending in a tube that Nitrox was not really allowing us to explore because we were right at the max depth of the mix. So we came back last time with Nat and with very light trimix, and we have this phreatic dissolution tube that just opened, winded out into this massive decorated, flattish, beautiful room. It keeps going down to 36, 37 meters of depth. I ended up in a dead end, but then I noticed in a small crack some ripples on the bottom, so I took another lead. We were pretty limited by time and decompression already. And I cut the line at front of a vertical crack with massive ripples on the bottom that shows water flow, so that's probably where the main passage keeps going. I think there is so much more to explore, and the last dive we did there with crystal clear water and perfect condition in the saltwater passages, we noticed there were massive leads we had not seen because of the hydrogen sulfide on some other dives. We found some other big leads that look really promising very close to the entrance, and as long as all of them open on some more passages, I think it's going to be an ongoing, non-stopping exploration project for at least a long time, probably a few years.
point, it should be clear to you that there are vast and numerous cave passageways all over the Yucatan Peninsula. And of course, that makes it seem like there's a huge amount of water. But the Yucatan Peninsula is rock first. It's a rock matrix filled with a much lower percentage of water. And the caves and flowing water are the exception, not the rule. Most of the peninsula is rock with salt water filling it, with a tiny freshwater lens, precious freshwater lens, perched on top. I work a lot with renowned hydrogeologist Dr. Patricia Beddoes, and we had a discussion recently of how much fresh water there really is here. And through a lot of math and scientific thingies, she suggested that it's probably between 9 and 13 cubic kilometers of water. That's not a lot for a whole peninsula. Humans have a big impact on the caves, like this collapse that happened just up the road from my shop about a month and a half ago. This is less than a kilometer from my house, where they were grading the highway for expansion, and they collapsed a flooded cave. It puts things in perspective. These caves are valuable resources, and as much fun as they are to dive, we also must consider the caves in water use and development of the area, both for their significance for history, for the myriad of creatures that live inside of them, and for the animals that depend on them out of the water, like ourselves. So if you've made it to this point of the talk, I'm sure you're interested in the world around you. And so I will end this talk as I end all of my talks, urging you to stay curious and to explore. I explore caves, but as divers, each of you out there has your own unknown, whatever it is, and whatever your unknown is, you should go after it. It may take some effort. It might not always be comfortable or easy, but trust me, it's worth it. Thank you everybody for watching my talk, and I'm happy to take any other questions at this point.
That was great, Natalie. I have quite a few questions to go over now with you.
Okay, I tried to get out of the screen share. Hold on, stop share.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll start off with a list of questions. So you're finding ancient things in these caves, ancient bones and stuff like that. How many have you personally found on new exploration? So like things that have never been seen by modern man, so to speak.
Yeah, quite a few. The biggest thing we found is the giant ground sloth. I mean, we're not the first people to find a giant ground sloth, but it's in a new area and it's quite far from the entrance. And then you find a lot of smaller bones. Often they're much closer to the sort of cenotes of the cave entrances where things could fall in. We've also found some pottery and things like that. And all of those have been reported to the Archaeological Institution here in Mexico.
So how many people are actively, that you know of, exploring caves like this, like what you and Vince are doing? As like,
Yeah.
far as like, yeah.
There's actually, well, this is the thing, right? So I think we probably sound pretty cool at this point, but we're not the only people doing this. There's a lot of really awesome cave divers down here and a lot of people to explore. And there's a huge amount of us that have active projects. There's probably 20 or 30 people that are often actively exploring when they're not teaching. So there's just a huge unexplored, untapped sort of second floor in the peninsula.
So this comes to the next question of when you're exploring, what technology are you using to map the caves? GPS, sonar, are there, and there's a comment about Jill Heinrich using some sort of autonomous mapping vehicles. Are you involved with anything like that, or what technology are you using?
I started mapping just by hand. The traditional way to do this is you use a depth gauge, a compass, and a piece of string. And you take the depth of your tie-off point, and then you measure along the line to next tie-off point and get the angle. And from this, you make a stick map. And then from there, if you wanted to do like a full map with like walls and everything, you go back in the water on a second day with this map, and then you would draw details, measuring how far the walls and the ceiling are from you and adding details to your map. This is the traditional way to do it. I now, for the last maybe 3 or 4 years, have been using a device called the M-Nemo, just like it sounds, which was developed by Sebastian Keister, who actually works down here. And he's like a mathematical genius and cave diver. And so he came up with this device that you clip onto the line, and then you just run it along the line between each tie point and just kind of hit like a button to say, okay, that's the end of this one segment of the line. And then you plug it into his software, which is created, which is called GUIDELINE. And that just spits out a map from you on Google Earth immediately, which is really, really cool. There are people that have used some sort of sonar-y devices. Those are good for getting like wall distance and height and floor. But the stuff that Jill is using is super advanced, and there wouldn't be any way for me to get my hands on that sort of technology. It's super expensive, and they can get reasonable results. I think the advantage of mapping vehicles would eventually be things like.
Okay, you're breaking up a little bit right now. Uh-oh. Hopefully the internet connection